the shame and the guilt and the unworthiness and all these different energies that are creating the effect of watching porn. I had no idea what that was at the time, right? So then I started watching porn again, and then it started to escalate. And escalation in porn has to do with dopamine escalation. So it happens in a very simple form of, okay, when I open up a tab to watch porn, if I surf multiple tabs, every tab that I open, dopamine is being produced. Dopamine is also being produced in anticipation of watching it. And then when you actually orgasm to pornography, a massive flood of dopamine and oxytocin is created. So oxytocin is the binding chemical, the love chemical, right? This actually binds you to porn. So when I'm working with gentlemen now, I say porn is your mistress. So they start to understand that it's an actual entity, right? But for me, after a while, that dopamine becomes desensitized to where you want to act it out.
Zack Blakeney was the first ever guest to join the show, and he was so gracious in agreeing to do so back in January when I very first started. And it was him that introduced me to Justin Lovato and Scott Holiday, who then introduced me to other people. And I feel like a lot of the guests that I've had on the show really kind of began with Zack introing me to them. So I feel like I have him a debt of gratitude, and it's wonderful to have him come and join for a second time around. If you watch the first episode with Zack, you may notice that his energy has really softened since the first show, and it's beautiful to see his own personal evolution. He's also switched from coaching self-mastery to dialing his niche into the porn niche, and how that really ties into his personal story. And what's beautiful to see is, whilst there is an online presence for helping overcome porn addiction, there isn't really in the way that Zack does it with his spiritual approach. So it's really wonderful to hear that. We get into all sorts of topics, and it's just really beautiful to catch up with Zack, feel his energy, and have him back on a second time around. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, because it really helps out the channel, and maybe even hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube. All right, that's it from me. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope you enjoy the show.
Zack Blakeney, welcome back, brother.
Hey, what's up, man?
It's yeah, it's good to have you back. The first guest of the Lost and Found podcast, and it's just great to have you back on a second time, and for me to have, kept consistent and all the things that it's led to. I'm just really looking forward to catching up and to honoring you and having you back, and yeah, excited.
Well, I feel honored being the first return guest, man. So, our first conversation was one of my favorite podcasts that I've done. And typically, I can't remember some of the things that I say when I'm on podcasts, but I recall a lot of what we talked about. And we went really deep into self-mastery and consciousness. And, I was even thinking about it today that, a lot of the podcasts I go on, they're not necessarily ones that I can be totally free with my expression of what I believe, because, I can still get my message across, but I intentionally use the lingo that they're using so that I can create a bridge in understanding of what I'm saying to how they actually speak. And I appreciate being on this one because I don't have to do that. So I can just speak in the way that I know is true. And in this way, maybe people can identify with this as well, because a lot of times we feel like we might have to limit our expression in that way. But I haven't actually experienced that. What I mean by that is that when you are able to be empathetic to where people are, you can create that bridge to understanding of what you're saying. So it creates a challenge. But in this way, it's a lot easier. So with you, it's a lot easier. There's no challenge to it. I can just speak freely.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. That's really what I want this to be as well. To be able to have those conversations where it is just free flowing, and off the back of when you were on for the first one, the people you introed me to, it feels like the tapestry kind of just wove through a lot of the Austin community. Justin and Scott and Sean and Jake, and it was really cool to kind of weave through and have all those different people on where there's these kind of touch points of, like shared like commonality and people who knew each other. And just a big resonance with all of those people and that kind of feeling of just vibing and just that freedom of expression. And I totally feel you on that.
We got to get you out to Austin, brother.
I know, right? It's
Yeah, make
calling.
a
It's
trip
calling
down.
me.
Yeah, I got a bed for you, bro.
I love
Now you
that.
got a
I
whole
love that.
networking community out here.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's just a matter of time for sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So what's been going on with you, man? What's new?
Well, man, a lot has changed since we last spoke. And I guess I'll start with the first story that brought me to where I'm at right now. So I was invited to speak out in San Diego at an entrepreneur conference. And the last time we spoke, I worked with a lot of business leaders and entrepreneurs in consciousness or performance, spirituality. For them, they would say it's performance, but it's really purpose and finding their own divine will inside of themselves. But so that's where I was at that time, serving, those type of clients. So I went out to this conference to speak. And, I was going to speak about conscious leadership and also metaphysically, how you create your life. Well, the first gentleman that speaks before me speaks about conscious leadership. And the second gentleman was a disciple of Joe Dispenza. So he essentially said the same things Joe Dispenza says. And my talk was going to be kind of like, a mix between the two. And I realized that I could talk about it differently and in my way and everything else, but it's like, well, how else can I give value to this audience? And, in the business world, a lot of times we forget that we're human and we forget that, and what I mean by the business world, going to a business type conference, it's just all business talk. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, hey, how are you going to increase your sales? How are you going to get more clients? How are you going to lead your people? So, I kind of dropped in my heart and I was like, what do I want to talk about? And the response I got was share some of the most defining experiences of your life. Well, the defining experiences of my life was back when I was in the middle of porn addiction. So I get on stage and I just literally say, hey guys, you've already heard from two incredible speakers that we're going to speak about what I was going to talk about. So I'm going to wing this a little bit and just tell you a couple of the experiences that I've had in my life that have really shaped who I am today. So I just started talking. No plan, no rehearsal, no nothing. And it brought me to a moment where I was leaving the gym with my ex-wife. And at the time, we had been together for 2 years. And she grabbed my hand and she said, we need to talk. And if anybody has ever been in a relationship and they hear those 4 words, typically that means there's going to be some sort of serious conversation. And for me, it stimulated a lot of anxiety. Mainly because at that point, I had been hiding a pornography addiction for 16 years of my life. So to go back in time a little bit from that point, when I was 14 years old, I started watching porn. I had no idea when I started watching it that it would turn into a 16-year addiction. And during that time, it was when, AOL dial-up internet was fading out and we're going to broadband high-speed internet. And I see that as being the birth of internet pornography, because then the internet was flooded with videos. And that was something that even science didn't know what video pornography would do to the human mind. And so that turned into an addiction from there. So by the time I was, in college, really is really where it got bad, because in high school, I was on my parents' computer and they did their best, to block the content, but they didn't know what they were going to get into. They had no idea. So by the time I got in college, that's when I was doing it probably 3 or 4 times a day, locking myself in my room, telling my roommates that I was studying. And, I always like to say I was too smart for my own good, because, I could be addicted to porn. I was started, smoking weed in college. Still got a 3.1 with my bachelor's, made a 3.9 with my master's, so it's just like, I never really saw it getting in the way of what I thought was success, right? Good grades, essentially, at that point in my life. But I noticed it started to become really a problem when I started to experience what's called porn-induced erectile dysfunction with women. So I had opportunities to have sex with women, and I struggled to get or maintain an erection during that time. And I also would experience a lot of anxiety. So I experienced a lot of social anxiety, a lot of performance anxiety, intimacy anxiety. And although I didn't know exactly like why that was the case, in my mind, in my heart, I knew. But at that time, I was so asleep, you know what I mean? Like I thought I was my thoughts, right? I'm still in that mode of my life, right? So it's like, this is just who I am. And I would come up with, all sorts of different stories in my mind, what's wrong with me? Why am I this way? Why can't I be like other guys? Because also it's about the normalization of porn amongst men as well. It's not like it was anything that we didn't talk about. We talked about porn. I mean, you can watch movies, and movies talk about watching porn. Like, it's been very normalized, right? Nobody really knows what's going on with it. So also, it was also like a sexual prowess thing, right? What we could consider, I guess, masculine norms. The more girls you have sex with, the more manly you are, right? So, I mean, I was having these conversations with my friends, but inside I was like, well, that's not my experience, right? But I didn't want to say that, right? I was ashamed. So, I got my first girlfriend and out of college, and it was, we were together for 5 years, which was about 3 years too long. But I started getting worse into pornography. I started watching it more. I started experiencing more PIED. And I was even taking Viagra and Cialis, and that wasn't even working after a while. So, I mean, think about this. I'm in my 20s during the height of my sexual prowess, supposedly. And, I'm afraid to have sex with my girlfriend. I'm afraid that I'm going to fail, right? And you get into your mind that way, and you start to create that reality for yourself. And I'm having the experience of it. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm afraid that I'm not going to work, that it creates anxiety and stress in my body, that constricts my blood vessels, that gets me out of my body, that gets me into my mind, which is what pornography ultimately does. It trains you to be sexually aroused to mental imagery rather than the physical connection with the body. And we'll go really deep into the spiritual aspect of this, because this is the stuff that sometimes I have to keep on the science-based, right, with other shows. So, me and my girlfriend from college didn't work out, and then I got with my ex-wife, and in the first year that I was with my ex-wife, I said that she healed me to myself because we had such a beautiful connection. It was like the first time I met my ex-wife, it was just like fireworks. It was like, I know you, and I don't know how I know you, and I know now, and she knows now. We've shared hundreds of past lives together. This is not the first time we have found each other in a life. But after that first year being with her, things start to mellow out, and the fireworks kind of go away, and then the habit comes back in because I hadn't addressed the causes. I hadn't addressed the shame and the guilt and the unworthiness and all these different energies that are creating the effect of watching porn. I had no idea what that was at the time, right? So then I started watching porn again, and then it started to escalate. And escalation in porn has to do with dopamine escalation. So it happens in a very simple form of, okay, when I open up a tab to watch porn, if I surf multiple tabs, every tab that I open, dopamine is being produced. Dopamine is also being produced in anticipation of watching it. And then when you actually orgasm to pornography, a massive flood of dopamine and oxytocin is created. So oxytocin is the binding chemical, the love chemical, right? This actually binds you to porn. So when I'm working with gentlemen now, I say porn is your mistress. So they start to understand that it's an actual entity, right? But for me, after a while, that dopamine becomes desensitized to where you want to act it out. So for my form of acting it out is back in the day when Craigslist was around. I would actually catfish men and women on Craigslist. So I would write emails um, and like talk dirty to these men and women. And I would get them to meet at hotels, but I would never show up because I could never get out of my bubble. But when I was doing that, adrenaline would happen. So my whole body would be like shaking, like while I was doing this thing. And again, now that I know this, the science supports that at some point dopamine isn't enough for arousal. So you actually your body starts to produce adrenaline. And this is where guys will start to get more aggressive with women in the bedroom, maybe with their wife. They want to start acting out some of the things that they're watching from porn with their partner without asking permission or having any sort of conversation about safety ahead of time. This is where Ted Bundy blamed, the heinous things that he did on the fact that he watched rape porn. So then that turned into, him wanting to act that out. So there is a tipping point for porn addicts to a point where they want to start experiencing it in their life because they're ingesting it into their program, into their mind the entire time of what they're watching. And that's obviously going to influence them a certain way. So I was emailing and she found a couple of the emails, and then I lied. I said, no, somebody hacked my computer. It wasn't me. This was after I asked her to marry me. And this is important because I know this is kind of long, but this is all, this is a big story. And I said, hey, it wasn't me. That wasn't me. Somebody hacked my phone, or I hacked my computer. And she chose to believe me. Now, whether she actually believed me, she didn't trust me, but she chose to believe me. So we got married. And after we got married, it was about a month later where she looked at me and she said, I don't know who you are. I don't love you anymore. But with that, we stayed together for another 2 years. But that brings me up to this point where she grabs my hand and she wants to talk. And at that time, we had built a business together. So we had built a business, fitness business that was moderately successful. We made a $250,000 in sales after 2 years being together. So like we were considered the darlings of the gym. Like we were the power couple. Nobody knew what I was hiding, but like to the outside looking in, like we had a perfect life. So she grabs my hand and we walk to my truck. And she says, we get in my truck and she says, let me see your phone. And yeah. Reluctantly give it to her. And then she goes to my in private browsing and she hits the Google search bar and down drops about 5 of my, most favorite searches when it comes to pornography. And I tell this story a lot. They're like, it doesn't save it in private browsing. So I like to preface, this was 2017 and I had a Droid. At that time it did. And she shows me the phone and she says, what's this? I said, I don't know. That's not me. She says, this is your phone. Who else could it be? I said, I don't know. Somebody hacked my phone. It's not me. Now, while I'm doing this, another voice is very loud inside of me and is saying, tell her the truth. Tell her the truth. And she said a third time, she said, look, if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm going to leave you. And then third time, denial, I said, it wasn't me. But then I'm crying at this point, and then another voice comes out and it says, but I did watch that. So this was the first time that I was ever aware of the duality inside of myself. That this voice coming from my heart, seemingly different than my mind, and an awareness that it existed. So as I'm leaving the conversation and we're driving home, this is the first time I'm ever actually suicidal. So I'm, considering going to a local sporting goods store and buying a gun, driving my truck into a pole, whatever else. And while I'm in the middle of these suicidal thoughts, a question pops up. And the question is, who's listening? Who's the one listening to these voices inside of me? Because I've always thought that I was this voice, right? This one voice, my mind, right? So it's kind of this new way of opening up. So it's about 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my bathroom and I look at myself in the mirror and I start thinking about lying to her about the emails. And this was the first time I ever had an anxiety attack. So I started thinking about lying to her about those emails. And then I start thinking about telling her the truth. And then just heart starts pounding through my chest, sweating, get super hot, get dizzy. I have to sit down. And I just intuitively knew with that reaction and that response, I was like, I can't live this way. I can't keep experiencing. If I'm going to keep experiencing um, these anxiety attacks, when I'm thinking about this, I have to tell the truth. So I go and I tell her the truth in the same parking lot that I told her the truth about pornography, although I like to say she forced it out of me. It wasn't like I was willing to do so. And she's crying and I'm crying, and, you know, but I started to feel a little bit more free. And about 2 weeks later, and this all kind of ended up to here because this is really the last thing I shared, was she comes home from work and I'm on the couch and I can tell she's not having a good day. And at the time, you could classify me as anxious attachment when it comes to communication, and she was anxious avoidant, right? So anxious attachment, I want to talk about it right now, and if not, I'm not okay. Anxious avoidant, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it right now. I'll talk about it later. So I kept pushing and pushing. Hey, what's wrong? What's wrong? And then she locks herself in the closet, and I'm sitting on the other side of the closet door crying. You know, don't leave me, don't leave me. At this point, I started working on leaving porn behind. I went and saw a sex therapist and started some PAA meetings. And I keep pushing and I keep pushing. And then finally, she opens up the door and she yells, I want to die. And she starts running for the kitchen, presumably to grab a knife. Right? And I get in the doorway and I block her and I say, please don't do this. Please don't do this. I'll go. I'll go. And as I'm saying that, it's like my life, all the choices that I've made in my life flash before my eyes. It was like I was watching a movie and I was this character in the movie. And I could see everything that led up to that point. And I had to sit in the deep pain of realizing that my actions had contributed to the woman that I love the most to no longer want to be on this planet. And as that situation started to die down, I went and I sat on the couch. And again, I was thinking back in a suicidal way. And another question popped up. Who's watching? Who's watching? How am I watching myself as a character of a movie where I don't feel like I'm the director of? So those two questions, who's listening and who's watching, if anybody listened to our first podcast, led me to the knowledge and the wisdom and the person that I am today, and now has directed me towards serving men in this way. Because as I was on stage and I shared these stories, something else happened where my heart just opened up. And I had not wanted to focus specifically on men that were struggling with porn because I had an egoic identification that I didn't want to be known as the porn guy. Mm-hmm. And on stage, I called myself out and I said, how selfish of me. How selfish of me that I wouldn't want to help the millions of men that are suffering, you know, from this addiction and what it's actually doing, and whether they're suffering from it as an addiction or whether they're doing it, hiding it, and are shameful of it. It is creating the anchor that prevents them from loving themselves and having beautiful relationships and building a business, if they're an entrepreneur, to the dreams that they see for their life, and having the connection with other men and women. And I mean, our sexual energy is our life force energy. It is one and the same. So to have millions of men and women that are suffering from this type of insanity when it comes to, you know, porn and not experiencing love and sex in the way it's meant to be experienced by the Creator is one of the farthest things away from unity and love that we can experience. And porn is a direct contributor of that.
Well, man, that's powerful. And, thank you for sharing all of that. And there's definitely a good few parts in there that I want to unpick, but, just
Yeah,
to
I
touch
realized
on,
it was long.
yeah, I was going to say, just to touch on the bits that you said towards the end there, about, not being wanting to know as the porn guy, but yeah, I've been studying a lot with Mark Gaffney of late. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Um, yeah, um, a real genius, real genius. And I was just with him in Belgium. I just got back like 2 days ago from a 5-day mystery school there, and I don't think I've ever come across anyone so thought out in the human story and human existence as him. He's in his 60s, his doctorate's from Oxford in philosophy. He's a rabbi, but his deep studies in the Kabbalistic mysticism of the Hebrew traditions, and he's part of a think tank. He's the president of a think tank with people like, I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Wilber, of integral theory. So there's Ken Wilber, Mark Gaffney, Dr. Zach Stein, who's like another kind of just legitimate genius, and they're just breaking down like the infrastructure, social structure, and superstructure, and how everything has been affected. And one of the biggest things they talk about is the intimacy crisis. The intimacy crisis that we have, and on all the levels, how that's affected. And just, with what you're saying, it really kind of just rings through how porn is a massive contributor to the intimacy crisis.
Yeah. 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 So we're talking about, what I talked about in my story. One, you are programming by watching porn consistently. You are programming your subconscious mind, and ultimately your subconscious or your unconscious, let's call it that, is where you manifest from. People like to think that their conscious mind is where they manifest from until they try and manifest from their conscious mind, and then they don't get what they want, and then they say, well, this doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work because you are not doing the shadow work to transmute your shadows into light. So when we're watching Netflix, you're programming your subconscious mind. You are being hypnotized in that moment because you're in a relaxed state, and whatever you're watching is actually it's affecting your identity in some way. Like there's no accident that Captain America is who I model myself after. I read the comics as a kid. I love the movies. Like this is his virtues, who he is, he's who I aspire to be subconsciously, right? And I can see that, right? Now there are other parts of him, like self-sacrifice and things like that, of a hero that actually end up not benefiting you, right, over time. But you figure these things out. But porn is the same way. So when you look at it, man, studies show about 9 out of 10 porn scenes have some sort of aggression in them. So it's not just that it's sex; it's actually sexual aggression. The things that you're going to watch, especially for myself, because I got so far away from just heterosexual sex. That was the first thing I looked at when I was 14. But escalation also has you start watching all these different genres. So, and the porn industry is a jungle of everything that you could, and then we get all the way out to the problem that the Asian community is experiencing with hentai porn. Now you're jacking off to cartoons, right? We're not even in the real, we're not even watching real human beings. And what that does ultimately, again, for myself, is that it can rewire you biologically. It does rewire you biologically. For me, I would think about porn images to attempt to get an erection while I was with a physical woman. I would also think about porn images to orgasm while I was with my ex-wife. And my ex-wife said multiple times when we got done having sex, I'd be so proud of myself. Ooh, I was able to perform. I got an erection. I'd orgasm. Like, this was great. Until she'd come to me and say, I don't feel you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this was all this way, but I didn't feel you with me at all. And then I would beat myself up more because I was like, man, I thought I did everything right. Right.
And there's that little bit there of doing. You were doing it, but you weren't being there. And that's what you couldn't feel. You weren't there with her. Like the beingness wasn't there. You were doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the experience of sex, and when I mean experience, I'm talking about the experience through the body, right? The body is just the soul's expression of physicality. And what a lot of people don't know is that the soul is outside of the body. So the soul carries the body. The soul isn't in the body. The soul is about 50 feet in diameter outside the human body. That's our etheric body. And our etheric body holds the physical body on the inside of it. So the physical body holds the chakras, right? The energy centers inside of it. And when we make love, as in when we have sex in the way that God gave us a penis and a vagina, and do so in a way that we are honoring God's love through this process, we end up activating the green energy center, the heart energy center. And sex is the only thing, the only physical thing that we can experience unity on Earth. Because once a man is joined with a woman in sex, literally the body is inside of a body. This is unity that we get to experience. So when you experience it that way, and you're also present with your partner, and I do want to say that, like, I would imagine a man to a man and a woman to a woman could be the same if they're opening up their green energy center. So I don't want to discount just heterosexual sex in this way. But once you open up the green energy center and it's actually making love, it's an energy exchange. So if a man is to orgasm inside of the woman and the woman orgasms, but through that process, they are completely present with each other, it's an energy exchange. I'm grateful that I can have sex this way with my fiance now, because when you get done, you just kind of lay there and you feel so full. Like my body is warm. I just kind of lay there and I feel like so full with myself.
Yeah.
But when we masturbate to pornography, we're not activating a green energy center. We're only activating the yellow energy center, the self-service, the identification of who we are. So when we only activate the yellow energy center and we're not getting an energy exchange, this is actually draining our energy, right? It's draining life force energy as men. Yeah. And then that's when we start to experience the problems of low vitality, social anxiety, feeling as if we're lacking purpose, lacking drive, lacking motivation, all these different things. So there is a lot of credence to semen retention when it comes to being able to hold it in and to transmute this energy. But a lot of people don't really understand how to transmute sexual energy because I think it's a mental thing. And it's not a mental thing at all. It's a physical, emotional thing. So the more we try and think ourselves into, I'm retaining my semen, and now let me think about how I can use this energy. Sure, thought is involved, but it has to become a somatic experience. So my tip for this, for anybody that's listening that wants to really have a practice of transmuting sexual energy, is one that's done during meditation for me. So when I'm meditating, I put myself into, let's just call it the quantum field. I put myself into an awareness of my body. And then through that process, we can transmute shadow energy through our sexual energy center. And I want to give shout out to, I can't remember the author. It's Caroline something, but the book is called Existential Kink. Brother, you need to check out this book. Mm-hmm. So what she's done is she shows how to like the tagline of the book is get off or get what you want by getting off on what you don't. And she gives you some direction into how to take the things that you're shameful about, the things that you feel guilty about, these shadow sides of you, and how to direct the energy through your sacral so that you experience, best way I can describe it is like a body orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing so, transmuting this energy, right, into life force energy. And that book, plus my own spin on what I've been doing, has been incredible when it comes to knowing actually how to direct the energy to enrich my life and my own energy in my life.
It's no coincidence that you're saying this. So what I just came back from in Belgium, day 4, we're doing this embodiment exercise, and it's all about the Heros Gamos, and it's with Dr. Christina Kincaid, which is Mark's partner. She's like a core energetics practitioner and does a load of different types of embodiment work. And it's all about activating circle and line energy, which beneath masculine and feminine, it's circle and line. And Mark does the deepest breakdown on all the characteristics of line, all the characteristics of circle, both of them in the light and both of them in their shadow, and how they show up and appear. And one day we're fully focused on line energy, one day we're fully focused on circle energy, and then we're doing the union of line and circle energy. And one of the practices we did for that, I would sit down on the floor, and we have a partner who would literally straddle over. So our root chakras were together, heart chakras together. And the job of, and it wasn't just male, female, you'd both do each role. So my job was to be line energy, which is very steady. The nature of the line is to penetrate, and not just phallic penetration, but as in to be able to penetrate with a gaze, with your hold, to penetrate an idea, to kind of birth something new out of an idea by penetrating into all these different ideas. But the idea was we connect to the heart, we access God, and then the circle energy is to open up and to receive. I've never done anything like this, man. There are people around the room just having full body, multiple orgasms. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty wild. You know, we're fully clothed, okay, just
Yep.
and it's not sexual.
No,
It
not at all.
wasn't sexual.
Yeah.
So my partner's here, and I'm just kind of breathing with her. And to begin with, you know, I can feel she starts to shake a little. She softens first, fully softens. She's fully receiving my energy. She lays back. There's a pillow behind her. And to begin with, there's tears, and there's just kind of releasing. And then her body starts to move more as we both continue to breathe. I'm just fully line energy, just holding. It's like just immense presence. As she's continued to breathe in this circle energy, in this receiving, her body starts to wave. This is like 3 days ago. I just wave in like this. And then I just feel guided, put my hands over her sacral. And as I do that, body starts trembling, body starts shaking. And I'm kind of moving my hands like this up her body. And her eyes are closed. My hands aren't touching her, they're just above. She can't see my hands. As I do this with my hands, her body is going in waves as I'm doing this. And for having no reference of doing this, just feeling intuitively guided, after it was like, whoa, wow. And this was about the full union of all the chakras, fully connecting to love, but truly connecting to God. And then the idea of anchoring all that in this line energy, penetrating with it energetically, and the other person receiving that love of God. And it was just wild to be in that room with like 100 people and all these different energies that were going on. It was mind blowing. So it's just like, of course, we're going to be having this conversation like a few days after that.
Well, and you know that's it's easy for women because in you know the anatomy of a woman is lined up to receive, right?
To receive, yeah.
Um, for men, it's possible though as well. I mean, I've been able to do it, so I'll say a little bit of my quote unquote secret, but it's not a secret. One, I like ass play, so like I enjoy that, right? And my partner doesn't mind doing that as well. And I'm actually, it was interesting because for a while, you know, as a man, right? You're kind of okay. I like ass play. Like, am I bisexual? Like, is this like something? Like, do I need to like look at this? Like, whatever else? Like, no. There's a reason why God put an orgasm spot in our ass. It is what it is. But I wrestled with it for a while. But of course, my partner was willing to, you know, acquiesced and do these things. But it taught me how to surrender. I didn't understand what it meant to surrender and receive in that way until I actually had that experience with my body through that process. And it set me up to be able to have this body orgasm through this process because my body remembers what that feels like. And it is full surrender and receive. And my masculine, and when I say masculine, let me rephrase that. My um, conditioned man ego, let's call it that. My conditioned man ego is like, no, bro, like this is weird. No, dude, what does this mean about you and everything else? What does it say about you and all these things? But it was like, no, man, this is just actually what it feels like to be in balance and what it feels like to receive. And I realized how many ways I was blocking myself from receiving in my life, all because of that. So I was able to heal a big part of myself, through a sexual act with my partner who I love, and I love to do these things, and then realize that it had nothing to do with my sexuality. It has everything to do with just being able to feel receiving and what that's like. So a body orgasm for me wasn't like I was erect or anything like that. It was literally, it was like energy came from my sacral. It went up to my crown. It went back to my sacral, and then like it got warm, and then I like vibrated through my body, and I'm like, do this thing, I'm like, holy crap. And I experienced oneness. Right from there, I like opened my eyes and I was like, I see God everywhere. It was just that union that happened.
And that, in my opinion, from what I experienced this last weekend, is the uniting of the line and the circle, which is the uniting of the masculine and the feminine, but also within, because we're all made up of line and circle energy.
Yeah.
And the nature of the circle is to receive. So we switch it round, and then it's my role to go circle.
Mm-hmm.
So now she gets into line energy, and I'm kind of like sat over the top of her, same thing, being held. I'm just breathing, laying back, and I can feel like, I kind of feel nice, but I'm not really feeling much. And then there's other practitioners coming around to help support and kind of do some energetic body work, and I'm still breathing, holding eye contact, and I'd want to close my eyes, and she was like, no, you have to keep looking eye to eye, like there. I start getting pins and needles in my hands, like when you do holotropic breath work, when they start to kind of claw in like this, and also in my jaw. But then completely in my first and second chakra, like full on pins and needles. I don't mean tingling, I mean actual pins and needles, like when your arm's dead. And this starts happening. And then I have to keep breathing. And then it's like there was a breakthrough, but it wasn't like an orgasmic sense. I had a huge emotional release. And it wasn't and when I say huge emotion, it wasn't like really expressive. I just lay there and just tears just flowed. And what came up was my resistance to receiving. And my entire life, I felt like I just didn't deserve to receive. And one of the things that I had an awareness of is when I'd had these experiences of channeling and different things that feel very mystical, where I feel like God's coming through me,
Mm-hmm.
I would then almost turn away because I felt like I didn't deserve to receive God.
Mm, yeah.
And this all came through this exercise, and I just lay there. And Krista, who I was partnered with, bless her, she just held me. And tears just strolled down my face for about 10 minutes. Just lay there, just kind of gently, tenderly. And it was all this piece about receiving, but I had to allow myself to fall into this energy and literally have to breathe through this barrier of resistance to receive. And then I just received her. And it was incredible, man.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why a lot of channels are women, right? Because they're wired, to receive and to be open in that way. And the experiences I've had with channeling haven't been very prolonged, And when I mean channeling at this point, because there's, I could be channeling right now, right? But an outside source, right? A different entity, let's just call it that. It hasn't been very long for the same reason. Like I'll experience it. I was with my buddy Sonny, and we were, out on the porch, and just for whatever reason, Octurians came knocking and started like speaking through me, and then like I was good until I got freaked out because I didn't have control. Right? I was like, "What the fuck?" Wait a second. What? Like it literally felt like energetically like something was sitting on me, and I was kind of in the back seat of my own vehicle, you know, and like it was talking, and I was aware of what was being said, and I could hear it through my mind, but it would only happen in spurts because then my ego would take back over and be like, "Nah, this is uncomfortable." Um, so this has been interesting for myself inside of this because I'm called to be whatever I'm called to be. Um, I've never thought of myself as being a channel in that way, but I've had some experiences that are starting to show me something different. And again, I don't know what that means in the long term of things. If you're here to help me with my mission, come on in. But if not, don't waste my time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think there's that interesting piece there about a lot of men, especially if we feel like we've had to be a masculine, then often that is to give, to
Mm-hmm.
penetrate, and but we can find it hard to receive.
Yeah.
Even compliments, like just
Mm-hmm.
kind of, one of the things that Mark was saying, to receive is not passive, it's an active thing. You have to actively receive. If someone pays me a compliment, I'm like, oh yeah, thanks. Like, but I kind of don't really take it in. But actually looking at them and genuinely receiving it,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's actively receiving. And as men, we can even struggle with that. To actually receive a compliment can be, you know.
Yeah, yeah, I've started to notice that as well, and I'll get present. I'll say, because the first thing that my mind wants to do is just kind of write it off, right? Oh yeah, 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 I'll do that. No, I've been catching myself. I'll be like, oh yeah, wait a second, I received that. Thank you. Be present with it for a second. And it's interesting where that comes from. I mean, we're talking about societal conditioning, right? At some point, but for me, in my own interestingly enough, since I'm at my father's place in my own journey, you know, my inability to receive up to this point, or I guess let's not say inability, my uncomfortability with
Yeah.
receiving up to this point had a lot to do with, you know, wanting approval, seeking approval from my father, right? Wanting him to be proud of me. And I didn't grow up in a I'm grateful. I didn't grow up in an emotionally abusive house. My father wasn't physically abusive, like he wasn't alcoholic. I didn't have those type of things, but he did work a lot. He was OCD, still is, and the expectation of my own performative grades and who I was and everything else was always very high. So, if I were to get a C, that's pretty much unacceptable, right? So there's just these ways that I started to notice that, me seeking approval from other people, me seeking love from others, not only contributes to me showing up inauthentically in my own giving, right? But also at a very deep level comes from the desire for my father to be proud of me.
Mm.
And I was doing some mushrooms. This was about a year ago, and while I was doing them, my crown started getting, this is kind of knowing I'm getting into a channel, but like my crown like got really started vibrating and like kind of diffused the energy down, and then it
Mm.
started to almost hurt. Like it was like I had like a whole bunch of energy on my head, so I was like, okay, I need to go lay down somewhere. And I go lay down, and then I'm instantly met with an entity, and keeps telling me, and I'm still working on it, keeps telling me it's like the last leg of your ego is this desire, to be the guy, right? To be, when I look out, my ego likes to measure its value based off influence, right?
Mm.
How many followers do you have? How many people are listening to your message? And if I don't have a lot of that, then my ego likes to say, well, it's not valuable enough. Your content sucks. Um, you know, you're just not good enough, right? It's that whole trap that we find ourselves in. Um, And it's still a part of me. It's not that it hasn't gone away, but being able to identify that, and then when I say identify, being aware of it, right, um, has been a journey over this last year, right? I mean, what I shared about, not wanting to be the porn guy, like that I've become aware of that, right? I'm becoming aware of all these different things. I respect and look up to Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza and all these people, and I'm like comparing myself to these people until one day, my mind's like, hey, why don't you just like check out and see how old these guys are and like what they were doing when they were your age. They're all 65. Eckhart Tolle, when he was my age, was a counselor. He hadn't even written a book yet, like all these different things. So it's like I'm being guided by a source to ground into what's true, right? And so this has been my journey over this last year, and it still is. And I accept that it's always going to be a part of my shadow side in this lifetime. And as long as I keep the awareness of knowing that it's in my shadow, then I can transmute it to light a lot easier. But once I want to act like it doesn't exist, it starts taking control real easy.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is, and we're seeing this here through you now and lived experience, is that when you address the shadow so often, that is where we find our gift.
Yeah.
And the gift that is actually it's uniquely yours to share. Your story, like again, to Mark's kind of teachings, life is not facts, life is story. And life is not just a story, it's a love story. It's not just a regular love story, it's an outrageous love story. And 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 your story is chapter and verse in the universal love story. And that the idea that we're all a unique expression of the divine, and everything we all experience is unique through us, and through that we do have a unique gift. And everything you've been through, and it's like, actually, you've got to face the shadow, you've got to voyage, face the shadow, and actually own it. And in that you find a gift that is can truly benefit so many men. And literally there are men out there right now that are actually waiting for you. They're actually waiting for you, uniquely how you're configured. There's people out there that need your exact resonance to help them with the thing that really only you can help them with. And it's powerful.
Thank you, man. Yeah, so a part of that I don't want to be the porn guy was this vision that it wasn't grand enough, right? So like when I see myself in the future, when I sit down and visualize and everything else, like I see myself being on stages and being more of a spiritual guide in a generic way, right? And um, like I said, if I were going to use Eckhart Tolle as a good model, I'm not him, but how he has risen, and done his life and how he impacts people in that way and whatnot. And the ego is just like, helping guys with porn. Like this isn't like that's so specific and like it's so taboo, right? It's so blah, 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 that you're never going to get to where you're going to be if you try and do that. And then once that I called myself out and it went away, I realized that this is actually the grandest thing that I could do with my life, is to what I like to call walk through hell with these guys, because I have a map to help them get out. And then the other thing is that a lot of porn addiction coaches still have a Christian theology behind it. A lot of popular guys are Christian. Fight the New Drug is out, which I really enjoy, and they are more science based, but they still won't touch oneness. They won't touch oneness as being a cure all in a sense. And what I know to be true is that the ultimate healing is the self realization that you are God pretending to be a human being, that there is no separation between you and the creator. And I can't typically start there with the guys that I'm working with, but I'm bringing them there. That's the map, right? I'm starting you here, and I'm going to bring you to this thing. And that is the most healing part of this, is to know that God has no preference in what we do, and God still loves us anyways. And what you were talking about with like feeling unworthy of God, a lot of times that's religious trauma. I was born and raised Catholic. I'm a born sinner. It's a sin to have sex before marriage. It's a sin to watch porn. It's a sin to masturbate. It's a sin, 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 sin. And with that, sin means guilt. I did a bad thing. And then after that, shame. I am a bad person because I did a bad thing. So this guilt and shame is mapped into our program. And guilt and shame are the causes for watching pornography. It's the energy that creates watching pornography. To only compound the guilt and shame, you get stuck in an identity loop of that cycle. So to really love yourself, and this is what I've realized in my own journey, is that by loving myself, I love God. So whenever I really, and this is pretty recently, that I would look out and I would want to tell everybody, hey, you're God pretending to be human. Like, there's no separation. You're God, you're God, you're God, you're God. And I'm looking out and I'm doing this, and I realize that it still comes from an egoic place, because if I love myself and I unify with God inside of me, then I don't need to tell them that they're that. Then I get to be a living example of that. So my journey this past year has been that I'm grateful to be God, and I'm grateful to be with God, because it's all around me. And the more I'm on this journey, the more I realize that by bringing this type of perspective, as well as these modern healing practices, because, when you look at the addiction recovery space right now, it's 12 steps is the baseline, and it's all about victim consciousness, and they don't really there's still people, there are psychologists and psychiatrists that are modernized with modern healing practices like what you did. Like, that's somatic integration, right? Breath work, thermotherapy, line and circle. Like, there's just so many different ways to experience unity and experience healing somatically. But that's really missing in a lot of addiction recovery. So with these modern healing practices, along with oneness as the baseline, I've been able to get results for guys in, 120 days, 4 months, to heal from this, to heal from something that they've been struggling with for possibly decades. Yeah. And then what was revealed to me is that this is your stepping stone to where you want to go. Because if you can bring guys out of the depths of porn addiction with these principles, then when you have the case studies to be able to show people that are struggling with a little bit of anxiety or stress, you can say, well, these principles work for pulling guys out of hell. And if you're just feeling a little bit off, like, check this out, right? So there's been a lot that's been revealed to me through this last year and since the last time that we spoke. And I'm grateful for every minute. And I'm not here. And by the way, I'm not here to say it's all been butterflies and rainbows, because it hasn't. Because I've been on the pendulum swing. I've been on my couch crying and feeling like it's impossible to do what I'm going to do. And I've had moments of wanting to quit. I've had moments of feeling like I'm not worthy enough to be on this journey of what I'm doing. And these are just a part of the swings, but I also have moments where I just see so clearly that this is the way to go, and I'm just here to experience both and ride the waves.
Yeah, man. A few things there, and I feel like I've got to share them with you.
Please.
What you're doing is you're uniting people with the love that they are.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it's the most, what could you do that is more loving than that?
Yeah, I don't know anything at this point.
It's the most loving thing you could do is that. And just to reflect something back, because it's kind of been relevant for me. You said about sometimes I think, can I do this? And then there's times where you feel like, you can. Of recent, I've been really kind of, and you touched on it with the who is watching, who is listening. And it was kind of part of like Eckhart's realization of, I can't live with myself. And it's like the I and the self. And, when Jesus said, I am the truth, I am the way, I am the light, I think something tells me it was actually pointing to I, capital I, is the truth. I is the way. I is the light. And I think it's the recognition of that capital I that we all are. And I feel like when we're connected to that, which is that knowing myself as God, having a Sabri experience, that when we connect to that I know I can do it. But little me, little me and my story, that's the one that wavers, that thinks, oh, can I really do it? Can little I really do it? But when I'm connected to that capital I, knowing that it's not just me and my story, of knowing what I truly am, I just know. I know it can be done.
Yeah, and that's been the journey is, by experiencing what you are not, who you are is revealed to you, right? So this is the divine dichotomy, right? That in the beginning of all of our lives, before awakening, our program is built off of our parents, our teachers, society's voices. It's not even our voices. And that for everybody, causes some sort of internal pain, because ultimately, like, you're not you. You're just an amalgamation of your external influence, until you awaken and say, well, wait a second, like, let me start questioning these things and whatnot. And that first part of awakening is the mental part, right? I'm going to question why, and start questioning my beliefs and everything else, and that has value. It absolutely does. But I realize the journey that I'm on, that self-realization is possible, that the I that you just talked about is a possibility for everybody. It wasn't just Jesus. And um, that potential, or that possibility, is experienced somatically. So the second layer of that, to really become more of who you are. And if we're going to, I want to make a distinction in a sense of saying, when we talk about Christ or Christ consciousness, what's come from me in my realization is that, it's not something that is outside of you. It's something that's inside of you. And you're just peeling back the layers that are preventing it from expanding inside of you. So to be able to get to that point of self-realization, is a very difficult and hard journey. When I really see for myself what's possible, and the pathway to get there, that's really what creates the most imposter syndrome, right? The me starts showing up, because it's like, well, who are you to be on a journey like that? Who are you to feel this way? And yet it's not as big as we make it out to be. It's society that's conditioned us to believe that Jesus is untouchable and nobody else could be this thing, this living embodiment of God. And that's still a part of, inside of my program of what that is. When really I've experienced myself, and when I say experienced myself as God, as having experiences of source speaking through me, or experiencing things with energy. What you talked about, what your experience with the line in the circle, that is a miracle. That's a miracle, guys. Like, that's all that is. And it happens when we surrender and let go of our disbelief and allow whatever needs to come through. And what that is source coming through you, and you are a portion of source, and your body is just an expression of such. Yeah. And that's it. That's as simple as it is. The mind just complicates it.
It literally is. I feel like it's a separation, or the distinction between who I am, which is the idea of who I am, versus what I am. And actually kind of realizing what I am there is the who, which the who is made up of the story, but the what, most people will live an entire life never actually realizing what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this work is difficult, you know. It's difficult. It's difficult because of the environment that we find ourselves in. The especially the Western society, the go 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 go. But you know, we call it Western society, except for the fact that China and Japan and you know some of these countries that are you know high in gross domestic product, they live like Westerners. You know, constantly working, constantly grinding, constantly doing these things. So like that's a big part of my program. Like it's difficult for me to be here and to not work as much, right? Because I'm used to like, okay, Monday I'm gonna start working. Like this is the only thing on my schedule today, you know? And like I battled like, oh, I want to work. It's difficult in that regard. It's difficult because of the inner work. I mean, this is a constant thing. To bring the unconscious conscious is painful.
Mm.
It's absolutely painful because to be faced with what is, it's painful because the ego likes to think that things are being done to it, that there's a lack of responsibility from our ego. And when you are faced with the realization that you are the one blocking yourself in many experiences, as in like my, so for instance, validation, right? I'm blocking myself from experiencing what I want to experience by my need for validation. For me to be confronted with that, the first thing my ego does is like, well, you're a bad dude. You know what I mean? Like, look at you. We can always just searching out. It is the first thing that happens. That's the painful part. Until I'm like, okay, wait a second. I'm going to release that, peel back that layer, and then it's freedom. Then it's like, oh, this is so much easier. There's so much less energy. But most people might experience peeling back a layer or two and say, I've had enough. That's enough. I don't want to do anymore. I don't want to discover anymore. And then they just stop their own discovery process and they get whatever they get from that point, right? But
Yeah.
we have to realize that this work is never ending. Healing until we are back with the creator and whatever that is, whatever you believe in dimensions or densities or whatever else, like we're spiritual children in this lifetime right now. So you know, a lot of people are like, I can't wait to go to fourth dimension or fifth dimension or sixth dimension. You're still healing. It's always happening. I'm going to heal for the rest of my life if I choose to do the work to do so. And when you're done with this life and you go to a higher dimension, you're still healing. You're still not God. We are not healed until we are one with the creator and we experience ourselves being that always. And I don't know when that is. So until then, my ego can shut up when it comes to I've done enough work. The work is not ending because the more work I do, the more fulfilled I experience and the more impact I can make.
I do wonder if the idea of Christ consciousness actually is living in that union with God.
Yeah. I mean, that's ultimately the Christ consciousness is that, right? It's God union. And
To
when
fully
I say,
experience.
yeah, yeah, and to have that come through, I don't know this to be true, but I'll just say an experience I had. I was in ayahuasca in February, and you know, towards the end of it, after my third cup, vision came down, you know, into my third eye, and it was Jesus on a on a throne, and he was really funny. Like so like my interpretation is this is either Jesus or it was my higher self, right, acting as Jesus. I don't know, but I assumed I was talking to Jesus. So it comes down on this throne, and then there's like steps to go up to it, and he's really funny. He's like, "Look how ridiculous this is! I'm on a throne." He's like, come up here and check this out. And like, so I come up and check it out. He was like, I even have the clouds. Like there's a perfect circle where the light's coming down on me. He's like, look how ridiculous this is. Right. So first of all, he was funny. And then I had, you know, a question for him, a couple of questions. And one of the questions I had for him, I was like, look, like it's believed that you were just walking around being God the entire time. And I realized that that's true on a deeper level, but like, what was the experience like? And the message that I got back is that I lived both as human and as God, just as we all do. When it was time to heal, I knew how to access my inner God. I knew how to access that moment of healing through me. And when there wasn't a time to heal and I was just hanging out with the apostles, I was hanging out with the apostles. I'm a human, like I'm having a human experience. So, when I was flipping over tables in the, in the temples, like that's a human experience, right? But when it came time for service, I surrendered and allowed God to flow through me to have that service be done. And that was very healing for me to hear. And again, whether that's true or not, it was the message for me because it took away from this impossible situation of trying to think about how to walk around as a living, embodiment of God, union in Christ consciousness, and to completely lose myself through the process. And he's like, it wasn't that way. And he left me with a message, and he says, and I kind of like the same thing, with the validation with my father. I was like, I just want to be the best that I can. And he said, I'm proud of you for who you are. You honor, he said, you honor me by being the best version of you. And obviously I'm in ayahuasca, so that brought me to tears during that time. Right. And I'm just kind of having my experience, but it just really helped me with my own understanding of, who he was and how he showed up. And, it felt true to my soul. It was very healing.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. There's two things that I've been sitting with recently. One is the idea that we're not just a unique self, we're an evolutionary unique self, meaning that throughout our lifetime, we're evolving. Mm-hmm. We're evolving. And the goal isn't to be there, it's to be here.
Yeah.
Knowing that we're evolving. And something else that really hit me, I had someone join me on the podcast, Tom Ronan Goddard, and I met him in Vermont. I was invited to the board meeting for this think tank with Mark Gaffney and these different people. And I met Tom there, and he's 68. He's a doctor in psychology, deeply spiritual, wrote with Ken Wilber throughout the 90s, has had some really high-level company in that realm. And there was a wisdom that came through him, through lived experience. And one of the wisest things, I think, that emanated from him was this idea of him not being rigid as to who he thinks he is. And he said, every day I sit for an hour and I close my eyes and I want to see what it means to be this experience of God, having a Tom Goddard experience. And what does that mean? What does that mean today to be that? And then he says from there, that informs, as much as he can possibly do, that informs his decision that day. And I thought, that's real wisdom. To get to that age and to realize, because you'd think the older you get, the more rigid you get. And it's like the older he's got, the more he's realized there is no rigidity. And I just every day want to experiment. What does it mean to be this human having the experience of God?
Yeah. Well, and that's the premise behind in doing shadow work, right? So, the premise is, and I believe this to be a true premise, that, your natural state is loving awareness. That's what you are naturally. So for a lot of the spiritual community, and I fell into this trap as well, and I still consciously fall into this trap. So I'm not going to say that I don't, but this is what I'm working on, is that, the spiritual community wants to just focus on the good things. Like, if I'm going to manifest, like, let me think about all the good things that I want to manifest and the love I want to give to the world and all these things. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but ultimately you're trying to be what you already are. And if you try and be what you already are, you're going to fail at being that because you're already that. That is the ego trick. Hey, you just got to be more loving. How can you be more of what you already are? You can't. It's impossible. So you're actually putting yourself into an impossible illusion for you to fail at. It's a little game that you're playing with yourself. So if you say, okay, as a premise, I am loving awareness, then you have to look in your shadow and say, what are the things that are blocking me from experiencing myself as loving awareness? So how am I shaming myself? right? How am I showing up in guilt? What am I afraid of? Where am I being angry? Where I could have compassion? Like, where are these things showing up? So, with my clients, I have them do a deepest fear inventory. So I want you to write down all your fears, and whatever fear you write down, I want you to also write down, why am I afraid of this? So a common fear for a man that's struggling with porn addiction, and for a lot of men, is like a fear of rejection, right? Fear of rejection says, okay, I'm afraid of rejection. Okay, why are you afraid of being rejected? And that just directs the mind to start populating the reasons, excuses, circumstances, stories that are attached to this fear, right? But by doing that, that's bringing awareness to what is blocking me from experiencing. It's the first level of shadow work. Become aware of the things that you're experiencing in this way. And if you end up doing this work, a lot of the guys I work with, they experience a lot of chaos in the beginning. I was like, well, it's because you're actually diving into the chaos, and chaos doesn't go out quietly. Chaos creates more chaos, right? So, but then you start to do this work, and then you start to transmute it through meditation and different statements that allow you to start loving and accepting and possibly orgasming to these parts of you, because the premise is that God desires to experience everything. God desires to experience yourself as unworthy. God desires to experience yourself as being in scarcity. God desires to experience yourself as being watching pornography. Like, God has no preference. God desires to experience everything, so God can know itself through all experiences, not just the loving ones, also the shitty ones that you might feel that way about them. And by consciously judging them as being bad, you just shove them back down, and they aren't allowed to be experienced. And an experience is just like, you can have an experience in your body, right? Emotionally. So we shove them back down. We say, nope, that's bad. Nope, I don't want to manifest that in my life. Nope, I don't want to do this in my life, except for the fact that what you repress will express. So what you repress when it comes to the emotions you're repressing ends up expressing in all forms of self-sabotage in your relationships, in your business, in your life, whatever that looks like. So it's not like it's not going anywhere. It's just out of control at this point. So for me, by sitting down and saying something like, hey, I'm willing to give myself permission to experience my forbidden, wicked enjoyment in being validated by other people without having to shame it or disown it, puts a new story around that, where that's acceptance. And by accepting that, I'm no longer judging it as being bad, so I allow myself to experience that in my meditation. Oh, I actually love getting validation from other people. I must love it because I do it. So if I'm going to do it, I might as well love it. Now, the conscious mind makes no sense of this and says, well, then won't you just continue to be wanting validation? No, because the thing that's driving the validation is the shame and the unworthiness. That's the cause of it. So if I wrap love around it, then what do I need if I love myself? I need no validation. I need no outside influence to tell me who I am and what I do. Oh, then it washes away and it goes away. So this is a form of shadow work, which is how you can wrap new stories around your old patterns to love them, allow them to be experienced in a meditation, and then it no longer rules your life. It is Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it'll rule your life, and you will call it fate. That is what we do when it comes to shadow work, and how it no longer becomes fate in your life, and you realize that you are the creator of such.
It's so true, man. I had a coaching call with someone a few weeks ago, and he was talking about, like, he used to receive bullying and this idea of being kind of weird, and and you could see he was really trying to live in a way where he didn't want to be perceived like that. And I said, do you think you're weird? And he said, no. I said, I do. And there was this moment where he was almost like, he looked really offended. And I said, and so am I. And all the best fucking people I know are weird. All of them. My favorite people in the world are weird. And then all of a sudden, he just burst out laughing. And it was more like oh, wait, it's okay to be weird? I'm like, you fucking hell yeah, it's okay to be weird. Like
Yeah.
I'm weird as like, look at the conversations we're having. This is kind of weird.
Yep.
But these are my favorite conversations. These are my favorite people. And then you could see there's this moment where he went from, because in ways he kind of is weird. He's not the regular kind of run of the mill person, but again, they're my favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
And he went from this moment of always trying to resist this to then this switch of, oh, I can embrace it. It can be a good thing. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. And you saw this in that moment, this energetic shift where it wasn't that he had to change himself. He just had to change the way he looked at himself.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all about perception. You know, whatever you perceive, you believe, and you experience. And you know, I had a similar thing happen with a client that I'm currently with, and you know, since I'll keep him anonymous, I'll just say the one thing. Like when we first got on the discovery call, you know, one of his points of shame was that he didn't want to be known as the young dumb guy. But this gentleman is very successful, like for a late 20s guy. Like he's doing some really big things, but he didn't want to be known as a young dumb guy. And I'm like, well, how much does not wanting to be the young dumb guy rule your life? And then we started breaking down all the different areas, right? Well, we're a few sessions in now. We're about 3 sessions in, and I'll say, so what's it like being the young dumb guy? Now he laughs at it. He was like, it's hilarious. I was like, it is hilarious, isn't it? It was like, look how you can now laugh at something that caused you so much pain because it is hilarious. Like, look at what you're saying to yourself and bring it forward. Because once you start looking at it and stop repressing it, you can see the humor in it, or you can see the love in it, or you can see the sexual desire in it, or you can see, right? I mean, like you can start seeing it. And that's the thing about illusion. The more that you look at it, the more it disappears. You just stare right through it because you realize that it's not something that actually exists.
Honestly, man, I need to reiterate this for for this space, you'd absolutely needed, because there's going to be no one else approaching this the way that you are, and it's actually an epidemic. The porn
Yeah, it is.
addiction crisis is an epidemic, and meditation is almost the opposite to porn. And one of the things I was learning last week is part of the nature of line energy is the desire for freedom and autonomy. And for example, freedom through meditation would be in its light, but the shadow of feeling free from thinking about work and it's to go below. And I guess porn will be one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what you're doing, this approach, which is really rooted in deep truths and spirituality and connecting people to what they are. It's needed, man, and it's so amazing to see that you've actually stepped into this fullness. And actually, speaking of shadow, you've kind of reclaimed that part of you and that part of your story, and
Yeah.
I can really sense the gift that's in it.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I realized that I was skipping a step, and it was the most important step. And that was there was a void inside of me, and I didn't know what it was until I went on this journey, and now to have that, and also the other thing that's kind of come forward is the realization of how to really do shadow work in a very big way. And that's another thing I feel called to do, is that all the things I'm doing with these guys to create like a maybe a generic shadow work course that really shows like, okay, how do you get into, how do you take inventory of these things, what do you do during meditation, how do you alchemize it inside of this and whatnot, because um, there's just not a lot out there that I've found that really is giving people a pathway of understanding how to do this work. So there's a lot of things that are blossoming from this initial thought of what it looks like and what I'm going to do, and I'm just tiptoeing the balance of doing what I feel like is aligned and also ready to receive what miracles are coming and already here.
And I think that's just a beautiful lesson for anyone that is listening, is knowing that if they want to get started with something, it doesn't have to be the end product now. It is this evolutionary process of, it's actually, there's excitement in the unfolding of what's to come, and maybe not knowing what's to come in the year or 5 years, but the excitement of allowing life to unfold and to evolve further and further into, you know, what it has in store for you. And what you're speaking of is the embodiment of that, and it's a huge lesson.
Yeah.
Whew.
Man, I love our time together.
I love you, man. You know, I want to put the links to find you in the description. But for anyone who is just listening, what's the best place?
Yeah, so Instagram, you know, is a great place to come. So you can DM me. You can DM me Born Free. You know, so that's the name of my company when it comes to this is Born Free. And I'll know that you're coming from this podcast. You know, I am completely open. I don't hold anything back. You can ask whatever questions you want to ask. I'm here to serve and guide in that way. Also, if you want to go, I have a couple of free offers. I have a free Telegram group. It's private for men. Right now, we got about 47 guys in there that are really, you know, encouraging each other and sharing their story and doing that. I also do free bi-weekly coaching calls for that community as well. Then I have a free mini course, and then my one-on-one coaching as well. You can go to the one-on-one coaching is www.iambornfree.com/get-free-now. And Sabri, I can send you the links as well if you want to throw those in the show notes to make it easy for anybody to find. But all of my social medias are my name. So Zack Blakeney. Nobody seems to have my name. So find me there.
Amazing. Brother, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my honor, brother. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
We made mistakes, I admit I was wrong. Can't take it back, can't wish you gone.